My guest became a caregiver when her father had a massive stroke. He was 37. She was only 10. That experience set her up for the day when her husband was diagnosed with Lewy Body Dementia. She has written an unflinching memoir, and we're going to talk about it today. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Page One, the award-winning show for writers with the reader in mind.
That draws the reader along, just like fiction.
Here's your host and producer, Zita Christian.
Mary Lou Falcone, welcome to Page One. I'm delighted that you could join us.
And thank you for inviting me.
So your book, I Didn't See It Coming, Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy Body Dementia. Now, for viewers on Page One, they know that I like to interview writers, and I like to interview writers on a whole variety of topics. But of course, I have a very personal interest in interviewing you about your book. My husband had Alzheimer's, similar to Lewy Body, but different. And so your book covers the span of most of your life, from that awful experience when you were a child, and you were given an enormous responsibility. But for the interest of time, I want to focus on that part of the book that deals with your role as a caregiver for your husband, Nicky Zann. And am I pronouncing his name correctly?
You certainly are.
Okay. Yes. So even though I want to focus on that part of the book, I always think it's important so that people understand the contrast of what is happening in a person's life. I think it's important for them to see what life was like before the diagnosis, before everything changed. And I know that you and Nicky had not the life of an ordinary couple. So could you give me the broad brushstroke of what life was like for the two of you?
I would be happy to. Nicky and I were a very lucky couple. We basically met in 1973 when I was 28 years old and he was 30 years old. We got together 10 years later as a couple when he was 40 years old and I was 38. So we were adults and we were established. I was in the public relations. I am in the public relations business, been 50 years. And Nicky was a very celebrated artist whose work hangs in the Victoria and Albert Museum, for instance. He was also known to be the inspiration, according to the Victoria and Albert Museum, of Roy Lichtenstein. So Nicky was a for real artist, and he had been a rocker in his teenage years, so he had lived. I had also had a very colorful and exciting life as a publicist, representing incredible people like Van Cliburn, Renee Fleming, George Schulte, the Vienna Philharmonic, Carnegie Hall, etc. So we were known by some as the golden couple. We traveled a great deal. We had great adventures. We had friends all over the world. We were out there celebrating life, being engaged in life and other people, and doing as much good as we possibly could, individually and collectively.
That's a beautiful picture. Not only because I think it celebrates what each of you brought to each other, how you enriched yourselves in that way of like, we need to grow our spirits, but also what you gave to the world because of the talents and gifts that each of you had. And a side note here, one of the hats I wear is that of a wedding officiant. And I'm always curious when I meet couples who have been engaged for a long, long time, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And they have their own reasons for, not wanting to take that next step. But at some point, something changes in their lives and they decide, yes, now's the time. Now, I know that you just mentioned when you were talking about the times when you and Nicky met, from 73, you become a couple in 83, but you didn't marry until 2017. So you were a couple for a long time. And I know from reading your memoir that Nicky proposed to you multiple times.
Correct.
And your response was, I like things the way they are. But at some point there, something changed. And tell us about that and what you did to affect that change.
Right. Well, there we go to the title of the book. I didn't see it coming. Yes, Nicky asked me to marry him multiple times, and I would always say, we've got such a great relationship. Let's not spoil it with a piece of paper. There was no reason to. And then I began to see things in 2017, late in 2016, early in 2017. And there were issues, cardiac issues, which turned out to be a triple bypass. But before any of that was actually diagnosed, I just had a bad feeling. And I said to Nicky one day, I think it would be really lovely if we got married. And he said, and what's your hurry? After it was that point, 34 years. What is your hurry? And I said, well, we're not getting any younger. We're very much in love, and we want to be able to protect each other. And he said, well, we can get the license. And we did. And then 2 days later, I said, I think we should actually go down to City Hall and do this. And we did. And so we were married on the 13th of February in 2017. On the 14th, we wound up at Mount Sinai Hospital, where Nicky was going to have an angiogram to see what the heart problem was. And on the 15th of that same month of February, he was operated on for a triple bypass surgery, which he told me that he was following the white light. He was leaving. And he said what occurred to him was, I've only been married for a couple of days to Mary Lou. I have to come back for just a little while longer. And he came back for a little while longer.
That is a beautiful story. I also write romance novels, and it's like, yes, that is the kind of piece you want in the story that makes people realize the kind of connection that two people have. Now I want to go to that point in the story where Nicky has had the surgery, and the surgery is pronounced by the surgeon and the other people involved as a success. But one of the things you wrote in your book, you said the head nurse, brutal and autocratic, wasn't so sure. She was signaling that more might be going on in the brain, but because her bedside manner was so obnoxious, what she was implying was dismissed. That is, until much later. So what was she implying, and how was she implying it?
She was implying that there were neurological issues going on. And she did it in a very autocratic way. She basically said to me on the day that he was supposed to be released from the hospital, I'm not signing the release papers because I don't think you are capable of taking care of him. And I just took a deep breath and I said, I won't give her name, but let's say Miss Smith. Miss Smith, I think that I'm so touched that you are so concerned about me. Thank you. But you don't know me very well, and I really am capable. So what is it going to take for you to sign those papers? And she said, a psychological exam. And I said, good, bring it on. And I called our doctor immediately and said, get the head guy in here. In came a young fellow who was he happened to be Asian, and he didn't speak English very well. And he would say things when Nicky would answer, like I pointed to a picture, and Nicky said, oh, that's a carafe. And the young man said to me, is that a word? So not a lot of confidence. All right, he gets his boss in there. In comes the head guy from the department, and Nicky and he kibitz back and forth. And lo and behold, the doctor says, there's nothing wrong with this guy. And they sent him home. When he got home, the hallucinations, which had begun during surgery, did not stop. The weight loss, which had taken place during the surgery, only got worse. He kept losing more and more weight. He was supposed to gain his strength back because heart surgery is supposed to give you back your vitality. That didn't happen. I kept thinking that the the signs that I was seeing, which were cognitive impairments, I kept thinking that those were because there wasn't enough blood flow getting to the head from the heart, and that would be corrected. It wasn't. And we went on like this for a good year and a half before I switched physicians.
I want to stop you there just for a moment, because there's a place in your book. I marked it down. It's on page 200. If you have your book there handy.
I do.
I would love for you to read that part, not only because the show is page 1. I mean, it's about writers, and I know a lot of the viewers are writers, so I would like for them to get a feel for the style, the voice of the person who is the guest, but also because of the subject matter. I think it's really important for people to hear that paragraph, because it is chocked full of things that those of us who are in an experience of caregiving for a spouse with dementia, we need to know.
Absolutely.
So if you would please read that part.
Happily. What I had been witnessing, but keeping to myself for months, were occasional hand tremors while Nicky was awake and asleep, talking in his sleep while experiencing dreams that seemed real, shuffling while walking, but able to correct it when reminded, speaking haltingly and searchingly for words, this from a guy who was quick with words and a great storyteller. Having short-term memory lapses, he usually remembered everything. Leaving the water running in the bathroom or kitchen, occasionally leaving the gas on and kitchen cabinet doors open, becoming very dependent, feeling uncomfortable going to appointments alone, experiencing high anxiety, speaking erratically so it was harder than usual to follow his conversation. And he had been working on the same painting for almost 2 years, which was not his work style. Nicky himself began to be alarmed about his weight loss, despite eating well, and noticed he was dreaming about falling. He was beginning to be aware of mental changes, not the least of which was thinking his dream activity was real. And it would take him 20 minutes to write one check. Something was definitely wrong.
Thank you for that. And I also want to say that, my husband, they initially thought that it might be Lewy body dementia, and then later said that it was Alzheimer's. Many of the things that you mentioned in that paragraph, there were things that my husband also experienced. So one of the things that I want to point out is what you learned, what I learned through, dealing with diagnoses and meetings with neurologists and all kinds of online support that I know we both sought, is that while both Lewy body dementia and Alzheimer's disease are both forms of dementia, and they have a lot of similarities, there are differences. I don't want to go into those now, only because that information is readily available in a lot of places. But I want to mention it because I think one of the things you did, and I did as well, was keep a log of symptoms, keeping a journal of things that were happening. And I know that, I think anyway, that helped the neurologist and the nurses I was dealing with, helped to narrow down the diagnosis for Dick, because then that affect medication. My guess is that was the same for you. But there were two things in your experience with Nicky, and I had one of them that is just not talked about a lot. And that's one of the key reasons I wanted to have you on the show to talk about your memoir, because I find too many people uncomfortable to talk about these areas, and they're critical. It's like going back to the 1950s and the girl who's 12, 13, 14, and she has no idea what a menstrual cycle is, and then all of a sudden she starts bleeding because nobody has told her mother, her grandmother, nobody has said what's happening, and she thinks she's dying. It's like you need to be prepared. So there's two sections in your book I would like you to turn to. One of them is about hyper-sexuality. And if you could read that part of it please. Maybe just set it up a little, because I don't remember where it was I asked you to begin, but set it up a little so that the reader will understand what the relationship dynamic is.
Right. So first, I just want to say that the big difference, the only huge difference between Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia are the fluctuations. With Lewy body, a person can be 100% himself one day and next day doesn't even know who you are. So that's crucial in what I'm going to read also. The sexuality part of it is something, my belief, and this is my personal belief, is that it still is the last vestige of what a person with dementia has control over in some way, shape, or form. And so with that, I will read the section that you're alluding to. What I cannot continue to be is a lover, and this is me talking. My love is as deep as ever, but my physical desire has turned a corner. I realize that Nicky still feels empowered in the area of sex. It seems to be something still within his control, and his need has been heightened. He has always been a sexual being, and now it might be the last vestige of his independence, of his manhood. While my energy just cannot go there, I recognize that since July, the telephone calls with an old friend who lives hundreds of miles away and who has had an unreciprocated crush on Nicky for decades have become more regular. I actually cannot remember how she resurfaced in his life after 25 years, but strangely enough, her reoccurrence or reemergence serves a purpose. Though he is clearly not himself, they talk frequently, and I soon confirm that their suggestive storytelling is leading to phone sex. The lady in question seems to need this as much as Nicky. My initial reaction is, what is she doing? Doesn't she realize that he is ill? Then I take a deep breath and accept that there is no real harm in this fantasy life that is playing out on the telephone. I go back to, there is no blame, there is no shame. I know, in the overall scheme of things, this is doing more good than harm, and I can live with it. What is so extraordinary about this bizarre turn of events is that Nicky trusts me and tells me everything, and for this I remain grateful. Mercifully, neither of us feels guilt about what is needed. That's just life. Absurdly, we all win.
Thank you for that passage as well. I think that's part of the, Renee Fleming used the word in one of the reviews of your book, unflinching. And I think it is so important to talk about that. And for people in the audience who might be in that situation of caring for a spouse with some form of dementia and might be looking for a memory care center, a nursing home, some sort of a facility, or some care in the home, I think it is so critical to have a conversation about how does the staff respond when a patient reacts sexually, because it is so vital. It's just vital to who we are. It's natural.
That's right.
And I think it's just a key thing to keep in mind and understand, the no blame, no shame part.
Exactly.
Now I want to go to one more, the other area that I think needs more and more discussion. And that's all about violence and incontinence in both bladder and bowel. And there's a section that I would appreciate it if you would read that too. I think it gives us a fuller picture. It's an uncomfortable picture, but we need to know. So if people are out there and their loved one is getting that diagnosis, you need to know what will likely, can't guarantee, but will likely be on that road ahead. So if you could go to that part, please.
With pleasure.
Thank you.
This section is from July of 2020. It's a log that I kept. Very early July brings on Nicky's aggressive behavior and anxiousness. I'm advised to make sure that all the visible knives in the kitchen are stored safely out of sight. This is a precaution that all LBD caregivers are given This is a precaution that all LBD caregivers are given in case anything gets violent, which it can. Mercifully, this doesn't happen to us. Dr. Cahill puts Nicky on a low dose of Seroquel, which makes him very agitated almost immediately. With Nicky, it has just the opposite effect of the calming it's supposed to induce. This sometimes happens with people with LBD. We have to wean Nicky off, but the aggression remains. Then going on, Nicky has awakened and, unbeknownst to me, has had a major, unusual bowel accident, trailing sticky, clay-like feces from the bedroom to the bathroom, through the hallway, into the living room, and straight into the kitchen, not to mention sticking to him like glue. Strength kicks in when you need it, and very calmly, I first get Nicky into the shower to clean him up. That accomplished, I leave him sitting quietly in the bathroom, bundled in a fluffy towel, as I strip and remake the bed so that he can comfortably rest while I spend the next 4 hours cleaning everything else. All the while, it is important to keep Nicky calm, repeating the mantra, "You are safe, you are protected, you are loved." I let him know that these things happen. There's nothing to worry about. Everything is fine. It's no problem. What I recognize is that this is the beginning of the end. The body is having one last massive expulsion of feces that resembles. The body is having one last massive explosion of feces that resembles meconium, a baby's first poop, before beginning to shut down for good.
Mary Lou, okay, a couple things. When that happened, and after those 4 hours, and you got everything cleaned up, and Nicky was comfortable, and he was sleeping, and you recognize everything that has happened, did you think back for just a minute to that nurse after the cardiac surgery who said she didn't think that you had the strength to take care of things? And did you have that little feeling of, I'm a whole lot stronger than she or perhaps other people also thought? And I say that because I've met quite a few women who early on, when their spouses got the diagnosis, they were asked at what point during the progression of the disease will you say, okay, well, when this happens, I will need to look for a nursing home, a memory care facility. And almost all of them, it was, well, when the bowel incontinence comes. And yet when that comes, it's like, you don't just stand there in the room and go, oh, I better call somebody. It's like, no, you do what you have to do to take care of the person you love. You'd be surprised at the strength that, I can't say that I was surprised in my own case, because I've been through a lot of stuff when I was a kid, but I think for a lot of people, they are surprised when they reach that point and realize, yeah, I can handle this. I can do this.
No, not everybody can. But,
correct.
But when you can, the love actually strengthens.
I agree.
It is an amazing feeling to be able to have the strength. And, I'm a great believer in something beyond myself. And so I believe that you're given the strength to cope and to deal with grace and with dignity for your loved one. That is absolutely necessary. And that in my book is love. And that's what this is all about, isn't it?
Isn't it, though? All right, I want to switch gears here for a minute and ask you about the writing. Because as I said, this book, the show is page 1, and a lot of the viewers are writers. You mentioned that in the early drafts of your book, you had some trusted friends and family members read what you had written, and that they urged you to, quote, be more transparent. And then you also said that your second editor, Kathleen Doherty, guided you to what you described as the daunting last rewrite to ultimately reveal deeply buried emotions in order to tell a more personal and poignant story. So can you tell us what your friends, your family members, your editor, what were they talking about that they wanted you to explore more deeply and more personally?
They were talking about my emotional life. They were talking about my real backstory, the underbelly of it all. And have always been a person who has been quite private. I am a publicist, so I tell the stories of other people. I do not tell my own story. Here I was telling my own story. And Kathleen Doherty said to me, if we don't care about you, we are never going to care about Lewy body dementia. And that was the key in the lock that unlocked the door. And I just began to pour out emotionally how I was feeling. Yes, I would sit at midnight with tears streaming down my face. Mm-hmm. Of course I did. But it really paid off because cathartically, I was able to release, and I was able to grieve through that process. And I was able to incorporate Nicky's artwork. It came to me one day that I could just begin each chapter with a piece of art that came from the Answer Deck, which is a card game that he did that evoked emotions. And so I chose a card for each of the 50 chapters to evoke the emotion of that chapter. And it took me 30 minutes. That's how organic it was. So Nicky wrote the book with me.
Oh, beautiful. I want to go back to the Answer Deck, but before I do that, there's one thing I did want to ask you about from a writer's craft perspective. You used a technique. You use multiple points of view. So you would be in your voice talking about something that you were experiencing, because this is your memoir. And in that experience, it had something to do with an exchange and interaction with another person. And then you would switch and go into the point of view of that other person. And it was very clear on the page that that's what you were doing. What was your reasoning behind that?
When I read biographies or memoirs, I get bored about halfway through because I hate the words I, me, and my. And so I had to come up with something that told my story. And my thought was, if I paid homage to those people who were important in my life and let them tell certain parts of my story, it would be a much more interesting journey than just hearing I, me, and my, and then I did. So that's why.
I like that. That's logical, and it does add a different texture to the memoir. Finally, I do want to go back to the Answer Deck, the oracle cards that Nicky created. And I was looking, some of the one or two words that were on some of the cards, like wisdom, doubt, solitude, battle, talent, a whole slew of them. If you could pick a card for those readers, viewers who are caring for a spouse with Lewy body or Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, from that oracle card deck, what would you pick as the gift for them?
I would pick resilience, because it unites what you're going through, and there is another side that will happen.
And I picked journey. So I think that our words together, they blend beautifully. The Mary Lou, I've got the signal that we are out of time. I do want to thank you very much for coming on the show, and your book, I Didn't See It Coming, Scenes of Loss, of Love, Loss, and Lewy Body Dementia. I also want to thank the viewing audience for sticking with me through my own journey of caregiving and grief. And finally, because this is page 1, I like to close this show with a quote from the late fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories." So find your story, find a way to tell it, and join me again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
My husband is a gentleman, a handsome, honest, hardworking, romantic man, 8 years my senior. Our 40th wedding anniversary was last summer. We didn't celebrate. He doesn't know who I am.